Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so thrilled to be here today with Bonnie Marcus. Welcome to those of you who are joining us on Facebook Live or here on Zoom. We're so thrilled that you've chosen to join us for today's webinar with Bonnie Marcus on how women can navigate the rapidly changing workplace. And we would love for you to find the chat panel here on Zoom and use the drop down to all panelists and attendees and let us know where you're calling in from today. If you happen to be calling in from your workplace, I would invite you to share that with us in case you're with the group. We would love to shout out your organization and your investment in learning today. So welcome to all of you who are coming on. Welcome to you, Bonnie. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Becky. Another beautiful day in California.
Well, it's awesome to be with you. I know we have so much to learn, and every time I talk to you, whether it's in a formal way like this or if it's on an informal call, I always learn so much from your stories and perspectives. And I know that those of us, those who are joining today, will benefit from that as well. And welcome to you, Nancy in LA. A reminder that as you start to type into the chat window, we would love for you to select all panelists and attendees so that those who are attending today's event can hear from you as well. So a few technical considerations for today's call. We are broadcasting live to Facebook and we are recording this video. So in the event that you have friends or colleagues who would benefit from this content, we would welcome you to share the link to this recording with them after today's event. We don't have any slides today. We're having a conversation, but we will have some resources that we'll send out to you after today's webinar with links to the recording so that you can take advantage of your continued learning. So welcome to Software Inc. in Fort Washington, PA, who are joining together for today's event. Welcome to Donna at the University of California in Oakland. Welcome to Jennifer in the Philippines and Tasha in Portland, Oregon. Welcome Stony Brook University on Long Island and Sharon in Irvine. Thanks to all of you who are taking a moment to say hello. We want to invite you throughout today's event. If you have any questions or comments in the moment about the content that Bonnie and I are discussing and you want some clarification or have a comment to add, I'll be glad to be following the chat and to add those things to the conversation in the moment. So please feel free. Your chat today is the best way for you to share your comments and questions with us throughout today's event.
I love seeing in the chat where everybody comes from.
I know. I'm jealous of Angela in Charlottesville, Virginia. It is one of the most beautiful places anywhere, in my opinion. My brother is a UVA grad. I haven't been back there in a long time.
Oh, there's someone
Wow.
here from Ireland.
Amazing. An international audience. That's awesome. And welcome to Jody in Alabama. I'm wondering if we might even have all 50 states represented today with our attendees. There are so many. Welcome to those of you from CommScope in Omaha, Nebraska. So we're going to dive into our content in just a moment. It's barely past the hour, but before we do so, I want to tell you a little bit about Bonnie Marcus. Bonnie is an amazing coach and speaker. Her latest book, The Politics of Promotion, is the second edition of the book that she first released in, I'm going to get it wrong, 2015?
Yes.
Yay, I got it right. So this is the new edition of the book that came out in 2015, The Politics of Promotion. We just launched this new edition last month. Congratulations, Bonnie. You may also know that Bonnie has a brand new podcast, and I'm going to let you say the name because I know it has the word badass in it, but I'm afraid I'm going to get the specifics of it wrong. So Bonnie, tell us the name of your new podcast.
It's Badass Women at Any Age.
Perfect. And Bonnie has been interviewing some amazing women. So if you haven't already checked out the podcast, we'll talk more about that at the end of this call, but we would encourage you to subscribe. I'm a subscriber. We'd encourage you to review and rate the podcast so we can get some additional exposure. Those inspiring and challenging stories of these badass women at any age are certainly ones that you do not want to miss.
I've had so much fun interviewing these women. Great.
I bet. Well, and thanks to Mariana, who told us in the panel that she loves the book. And wow, we have someone here from Nigeria, Bonnie. So this is going to be an incredible group of people. We welcome your perspectives and questions throughout the event. And let's dive in. So we're going to talk today about the changes that are happening constantly in our workplaces. And Bonnie, I would love it if we could reflect on the last decade and let's talk a little bit about some major changes that we as women have experienced in the workplace in the past 10 years.
Okay. For the most part, we've seen a lot of changes in the dynamics in the culture of each workplace. But I would say overall, we don't see a lot of change in the percentage of women who are reaching leadership. So that's really disappointing. And, if you look at the statistics, I think there's still only 6% of the CEOs in Fortune 500 are female. So, I hate to start this off with a bummer, but that statistic really hasn't changed. And so I think it's very important that today we're looking at some of the things that affect that advancement, what has perhaps changed in our favor and maybe what has not.
So Bonnie, I'm curious if you have any perspective about why that number of female CEOs in Fortune 500 companies hasn't budged in the past decade.
Wow, well, we could do a whole webinar on that.
Okay, maybe we ought to.
I think there are a number of reasons. There's still a lot of gender bias. There is the lack of sponsorship, lack of mentorship. It's still not a level playing field. There's similarity bias where men in leadership positions really want to promote and mentor, and they're much more comfortable working with other men. And I'd say that one of the changes really that's happened, to get back to that question, is there's a heightened sensitivity in the workplace post Me Too. In my inbox today, I just got an email about a new survey that came out from HR Acuity, and I didn't get a chance to really read through the whole thing. I think it's embargoed actually for the next week. But 69% of the women in that survey said that they had filed a complaint with their manager about harassment. But only 49% feel that anything would be done with it, that it would be taken seriously.
69%. That's more than 2/3 of women
in this particular
in the survey. Right.
So, and again, I don't have a lot of background on it, but there is much more sensitivity in the workplace about harassment, and whether or not some of these workplaces are taking it really seriously, or whether they're having kind of one-off programs on unconscious bias or, sexual harassment, really is situational. It depends on where you work. And I've interviewed a number of women across different industries who have very different experiences, where they feel that there has been some progress in terms of unconscious bias and some of the programs that their company have facilitated. And some will say, wow, nobody takes it seriously. They just have to go. It's mandated, and they go, and then everything kind of goes back to normal. So I think that's one area, that heightened sensitivity and around harassment, around microaggressions, around sexual abuse. I hope not, but that is definitely there's an awareness of that now in the workplace. Now, the good news is that because all of this is in the forefront of the news, et cetera, that there's a lot more information for women about this. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot more women know their rights than they ever did before. Whether or not their company has created a safe environment or a safe place for them to bring forward some of these microaggressions or complaints depends on the situation. I will say, if you look at like the whole last decade, that there is much more attention to gender diversity in general. And there's a lot more public scrutiny of companies who don't have equal leadership or don't have women on their boards, especially public companies.
Mhm.
where their board is actually putting some pressure on them now to have more female representation. So, I mean, that's a positive. There are a number of organizations like Working Mother Media, Glassdoor, that publicize how well some of these companies are doing as far as gender diversity. So I think that focus is really positive. And now we have to see how it's going to work, whether or
Mhm.
not it's really going to make an impact overall.
And it seems like it might take some time to see what type of impact that greater attention to creating diversity will have. We don't have any formal polls for today's webinar, but I'm curious for those of you who are listening, how many of you have noticed in your own organizations this heightened sensitivity because of the Me Too movement? More sensitivity to harassment or more information for you in your workplaces? Maybe just a simple yes or no in the chat panel to respond to this question.
So, these this heightened sensitivity definitely has affected women's ability to advance. First of all, we know that men are still the majority of leadership in most organizations. And we really need men as our allies. We need men to sponsor, as I said, to mentor us, to feel that it's okay to bring a woman on a project when it's much more comfortable, perhaps, to work with a man. And so that definitely affects the ability for women to advance. Another thing is that as far as networking, men are more comfortable networking with other men. They do the golf, they do fishing trips, they go out for drinks afterward. A lot of these informal networking groups may seem pretty innocent, but sometimes business is discussed and decisions are made. And when women aren't present at some of these groups, it affects their ability to have their opinions heard, their ideas shared with men who have the influence and the power over their ability to advance.
Yeah, that's a really important point to consider. Not only are women not represented in the boardroom, but also not included in those extra outside of work activities in a way that their voices can continue to be heard.
So one of my clients shared with me that she works on the trading floor, all men, her boss is, a man, and she had a really great relationship with him. But one day she found out that he had organized this fishing trip and invited everybody else in the department, all the men, and he didn't invite her. So she had a great relationship with him, and she went up to him and she said, "Hey, if you knew I like to fish, would you have invited me too?" And he said, "No, it's a guy thing." So yeah, it's a guy thing, but still they're discussing business, on the golf course or in the boat or whatever. And so women's inability to be included is a disadvantage of that kind of thing. And yet it's uncomfortable to force your way in many cases.
Certainly so. So we have a few comments in the chat, Bonnie.
Great.
So many people are saying, yes, they've noticed the heightened sensitivity, but Miranda mentions that she thinks it's not from the Me Too movement, but just because times are changing and the company is growing. Donna is saying in the university environment, they take these issues very seriously for faculty, staff, and students. Amanda happens to work at a woman-led business, but certainly has seen this in other companies. So yeah, I think that this message is resonating, that there is a heightened sensitivity and that things have changed.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly important to feel comfortable to be able to share your experiences with a manager who will support you and take it seriously. And that goes for both genders. even if you have a female boss, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get that kind of support in this situation.
Sure. Well, Bonnie, I know that you've done a ton of research in the process of writing your books about what women feel are their major obstacles in the workplace. And I'm curious what those are and how women are communicating to you that they feel that these obstacles affect their advancement.
Okay, so just a little background. When I was writing Politics of Promotion, I was also doing a lot of research on women and ambition. And I did a survey of over 600 professional women between the ages of like 22 to 65 plus, all women who were still actively working. And I really wanted to know what affected their ambition and their motivation to stay engaged and feel good about their work, et cetera. But one of the questions I asked was, what do you find are the major obstacles in the workplace that affect your ambition, that affect your desire to stay in the workplace and stay motivated? And the number one was they saw little opportunity for advancement, little or no opportunity for advancement. So that, coupled with the second, which is a lack of acknowledgement for the work, is really important, because those are key components to fueling ambition. Like, you need that kind of thing. You need the lack of you need the opportunity, and you need the recognition for you to stay really involved. And when women don't see that, like, men come into the workplace, and there's a lot of research on this, with an equal amount of confidence and ambition to women. In fact, women maybe even have a little bit more. And then after 2 years, like, women's confidence drops 60%, men stays the same. What really affects that? What's going on in the workplace? And so when you don't see a clear path to how you're going to get ahead, like, you start out an entry-level position and you look up and you don't see female leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a man comes in and it's like, oh, I can see a clear path. Women don't have that. And so it's not as concrete as, say, I'm not getting paid as much, which is another obstacle, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this feeling that we're not going to get ahead, and we're not acknowledged for getting ahead, that really causes women to either pull back or opt out, and that affects their ability to advance.
So, Bonnie, I'm curious how much you think that change in ambition between when a woman enters the workplace and she's exceedingly confident and then, doesn't see a path or doesn't have her work recognized, how much of that is industry specific? Do you think that there are some industries where women can and do see a path forward and others that are more male dominated, or do you think this is really across the board in any type of organization?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because there was recent research that Harvard Business Review analyzed with over 200,000 participants, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they found that what really affected women's advancement or ambition was not industry specific, it was company specific. So if your company really believes in gender equality, just not paying lip service to it, if they nurture your ambition and support your career, you have a much more of an opportunity to not only be optimistic, but to stay in the workplace. What they found is it's not family related. And my research found the same thing. it's not that you decide to have kids that you necessarily opt out. It's how well your company supports you as a woman and helps you, move your career forward. So it's situational. It's almost conversation by conversation and not industry specific.
Well, in a way, that's encouraging, isn't it? It's encouraging to me because I think that what that requires is individual action of people who care about changing the landscape for women. So it doesn't matter, what type of company it is. If there are people who care about changing the realities for women in the workplace, that's really all it takes. So, Bonnie, do you know of any examples? Like, are there some companies that are doing this quite well? And what types of things are they doing that's different, that does make a more friendly environment for women to advance?
Oh, wow. I mean, the one that I'm probably most familiar with, just because I've done a number of interviews, is Deloitte. And I think Deloitte has kind of been on the forefront of gender, diversity and inclusion initiatives. And the last time I interviewed I'm going to say she was senior VP of talent acquisition. But anyway, certainly a diversity officer, who said that they try to promote allies, so that if women have, or men, I mean, or all genders, I should say, face any kind of microaggressions or issues, that you can be an ally to somebody else, or look for an ally within the workplace who has been through some of the unconscious bias training programs, because I think it's probably mandated, but that it's these allies, these champions, who are really going to make a difference. And so, to your point, Becky, it's like one-on-one. Who can you find who can be your ally, who can be your champion, your sounding board, your role model? And by the way, that has a lot to do with political savvy, because you need to really observe and figure out who are the right people who will support you in the workplace.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Bonnie. So before we move on, a couple of questions that have come in. Angela was asking about which company we're describing, and I wrote it down. It's Deloitte. And then Christy is wondering if you can explain a bit more about what I can't talk, about microaggressions.
Microaggressions are a very subtle way that either behavior or a conversation is offensive to another person, and it's usually related to gender. Before the Me Too movement, I personally didn't even know what a microaggression was. And I think, when I was talking earlier about how we know more now because there's a lot more information out there, we're more familiar with what a microaggression might be. So, for instance, somebody might tell you that you look really pretty in that dress. Or I had one woman say that her male colleague told her when they did a presentation to be sure and wear like high heels. And she took offense to that. And or it could even be when you make a remark, this isn't gender related, and somebody kind of rolls their eyes or just does something that you find offensive. It doesn't fall under harassment, but it's a subtle way that you're being put down or feeling uncomfortable. And so those microaggressions, we in the past, and I know from my own experience in the workplace, I just kind of took it in stride, and it didn't have a label for it, certainly. But a lot of things that were made, I felt uncomfortable. I had a female boss once tell me that, that I showed too much cleavage, with my suit, and that my suit was too low cut or something. Like really, it was offensive to me, and I didn't feel that it was true. But now we kind of have this label, and depending on your company and depending on the situation and depending on who is the offender, whether or not you feel safe having a conversation about that is important. I mean, ideally, you would be able to say directly to that person how you feel in a way that wouldn't create backlash. Like, I felt really uncomfortable when you made that comment about my suit or wearing high heels. And I just wanted to let you know that when you made that comment, that was what I was feeling.
So is there also some request around that, Bonnie? So I felt really uncomfortable when you made that comment, and I would prefer that can you help fill in the blanks for me? I'm not sure what I'd say after that. I'd rather you not comment on my clothes. I'd rather you not comment on my appearance.
I think it's enough to say that it made you feel uncomfortable. You might say, I'd appreciate, you not saying things like that going forward. You want to make sure, though, that you say it in a way that doesn't necessarily put the other person on the defensive. So if you're in a situation like that, you don't want to start with you. You made me feel really uncomfortable when you said that. You always want to start with I. I felt uncomfortable when you made that comment.
Perfect.
And let that person know. I truly feel, and maybe I live in La La Land. I live close to La La Land, but I don't live in La La Land. That people, a lot of men especially, are not malicious. And that they are just unaware. They're unaware, and in that case, it becomes our responsibility to let them know that it makes us feel uncomfortable. Something that they said or did makes us feel uncomfortable, because otherwise they don't have that information. And so I think that it really is important that in some way we share how that makes us feel. Because I think for the most part, unless you really feel somebody's malicious and they're bullying you that's a whole different thing. You probably need to file a complaint. But if it's a microaggression, I think that you could probably address it one-on-one.
Sure. Well, and again, I'm curious to hear some responses from the people who are attending, and feel free to just select all panelists if you're not comfortable sharing with the wider group. But I'm curious of the people on the call, how many have experienced those microaggressions? And simply a yes or no would be fine. And again, if you don't want to share publicly, you can share just with us as panelists. I'd find it very surprising if there was someone on the call who hadn't experienced one of those microaggressions in the course of work.
Now, whether or not they were comfortable saying anything.
Well, sometimes it's so subtle, and then at least for me, you're not sure if it's actually I'm not sure if it's actually a microaggression or not.
Well, if it made you feel uncomfortable,
then it was probably a microaggression. Yes. So here's an example of one, and I won't say the name, but this person indicates that she was asked to take notes at the meeting, even though there were men at a lower level in the meeting. So the first time she took the notes, and the second time she didn't bring anything to write with, and then it never happened again.
I'm not sure who that was, but I'll share that when I was working for a tech startup and we were trying to get venture capital, there were 3 principals. I was one of them, and I was the only woman. And there was a CEO, and then the CTO, and then I was head of sales. And we went to all these venture capital firms, and I remember we went to one, I believe it was in New York, and it was very male looking, mahogany panels and leather chairs, and we got there early to set up. And the principals of the VC firm started to come in one by one, and one came over to me and said, "Would you mind going out and getting coffee for everyone?" So whoever put that thing about the note taking, that was the same thing. And everybody will say when I share that story, "Well, what did you do? Did you get the coffee?" And I said, "No." I put out my hand and I said, "Oh, let me introduce myself. I'm Bonnie Marcus, and I'm head of sales for this company." And I didn't have to get the coffee, but that was major.
Yes. Well, and I'm reading some of the pain in the comments in the chat, Bonnie, as you're sharing your story, including one woman who's sharing that a VP of sales tries to block her from attending important meetings, which must be a painful thing to go through. And one person made a comment, I think Miranda, that if you're closer to the person who's making the comment and you know their true intent, that's really helpful. Obviously, it's always easier to determine people's intent when you know them more. So tough. So we were talking about major obstacles in the workplace and how they affect women's advancement. Bonnie, did you have more on that topic that you wanted to share?
Well, I wanted to know two things as I was doing this research. I wanted to know what women were finding or not finding in the workplace that affected their career advancement. And then I wanted to know how they felt that they themselves were holding themselves back, that they had their own barriers. And then, of course, I wanted to know which ones they felt were stronger. And it turned out that most women, the majority of the women, felt that both the obstacles in the workplace as well as the ones that they had for themselves, their own internal barriers, were about equal. But the ways that most women said, the majority of the women felt that they held themselves back. Number one, their hesitation to self-promote.
Interesting.
Number two, their avoidance of office politics. Again, this is over 600 women, and this was the majority of their responses. The third one was just frustration with the whole system. I just get so frustrated with the whole system. But by far, the hesitation to self-promote and to be aware of the office politics, avoid office politics were the top ones.
So why do you think that there's so much hesitation to self-promote? Especially when women can easily understand that that's what's keeping them from achieving their ambition.
Oh, well, intellectually it's one thing, right? And this is true for both genders. Intellectually, we know we should advocate for ourselves, but we feel kind of phony and we feel creepy and we don't feel authentic. And it goes way back to a couple of things. Some of us who are perhaps a little older got messages that you should wait until you're recognized and be humble. And I was certainly, taught that you shouldn't go bragging. But I think the bottom line to all of that is because if you do that, no one will like you. And we do have this desire to be liked. So we can go out and blurt how wonderful we are, but that's going to turn everybody off and then nobody's going to like us. And the other thing we do know from research is that likability is important.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to be competent, but people have to really like you and want to work with you, and so that's part of the equation. But
so the reluctance to self-promote comes in part from our desire to be liked.
And not to turn people off. And here's the other thing. So I live in Santa Barbara. There's one little main street, right? And there's a retail store where they have somebody out on the sidewalk kind of like hawking and in your face kind of sales. And I don't know about anybody else, but as I'm walking down like the sidewalk, I'll kind of like turn away. Sometimes I'll even walk on the other side of the street because I just don't want to be confronted with that head-on kind of sales approach. And so I think culturally, we have that kind of a distaste for that. And when people are out there bragging in a way that is not effective, it has that same effect on us.
Sure, that makes sense. So we're afraid of becoming like that person on the corner.
Yeah, like the used car salesman kind of thing. Because for the most part, even with elevator pitches, a lot of people on the call may have been trained on that. I hate elevator pitches. It's not a good way to promote yourself because it's all about you and your agenda. It's not about necessarily understanding what the challenges are of the other person and how maybe you might be able to help them because of how you do your work, your value proposition. It's really all about me.
So that's really interesting, Bonnie, and maybe we're going to get to this with the final question when we're going to talk about some tools. But what you're doing is you're putting these two things against each other, the elevator pitch, which is more focused on, me, or the value proposition, which is really focused on the value that I can bring to my organization. So that's a really interesting distinction. I don't know if I've ever heard it articulated that way before.
I recently went online and looked at elevator pitches. And there are like these templates that you can get online about elevator pitches. And I was just appalled. It's like, hi, I'm Bonnie Marcus. I'm an executive coach in Santa Barbara. And something about, and I do XYZ better than my competitor. And my competitor is so-and-so. And then there was a call to action. I mean, I don't think a lot of people use that type of elevator pitch, but it's very stylized. You have to memorize it. It doesn't come across as being very authentic. So in many cases, it doesn't resonate with the person that's talking. So here's a difference, Becky, talking at you versus with you.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. So when we were talking about the ways that women hold themselves back in the workplace, you said the first one was that reluctance to self-promote, and the second one was a reluctance to get involved in office politics. Can we talk a little bit more about that one?
Yeah. When I was doing research for the politics of promotion, I asked a lot of my LinkedIn groups, Facebook, I asked a lot of large organizations that I worked with to put out this kind of a questionnaire about how do you feel about office politics? And whoa, it was like opening up this huge emotional can of worms that, I mean, women's responses were, it's manipulative, it's dirty. I mean, somebody said it's evil, it's bad karma, it's such negativity around office politics, it's nothing more than schmoozing. It's a waste of time. So, when that information came to me, I realized that when women avoid the office politics, they really don't have a clear understanding of what it takes to get ahead. They are setting themselves up to be blindsided by it, which was my experience, and why I wrote the book. And how how important it is, because you don't build your career in a vacuum. You know, if you just keep your head down and you do the work, that's good that you do good work. But if people don't know about it and you don't advocate for yourself, or you don't know how decisions are going to be made or who has power and influence in the organization, or what behavior is acceptable and what isn't acceptable, what project should I be on, what clients should I be, I mean, you're really shooting in the dark. And so it's so important for women to reframe office politics from being evil to being really, really important if you're ambitious and you want to move your career forward. And it doesn't have to be manipulative, because the way I view office politics, it's about relationships. And it's about observing all the dynamics, everything that's going on. So you have information on how to position yourself and you don't get blindsided.
So maybe we can transition, Bonnie, to talk about some of the tools from the toolkit that are mentioned in your book. I know there are 5 in the book. We're only going to talk about 2 that are going to be helpful for women now in navigating the current culture and the changes that we're all seeing and experiencing. So I don't think I know which 2 we're going to talk about. Which 2 are we going to talk about today, Bonnie?
Well, I'm going to talk about the 2 that address the top 2 concerns for women. So the first one is the mirror. And the mirror helps you to look at yourself, self-reflect, not kind of tune out like social media and everything else that's going on, because we get so distracted by what everybody else is doing and comparing ourselves. We don't have a true picture of really who we are and the value that our work brings to an organization. So understanding your value proposition is the necessary key component to advocating, self-promoting. And that is how your work, the way you do your work, leads to positive business outcomes. So that understanding then helps you position yourself within this organization as someone who is going to help your manager, your team, your company reach their objectives based on the way you do your work. It's not your job description. It's how you do your work. So I can give you a simple example from a former client of mine who worked at a large financial services company that was very siloed. And she reached out to me because she wanted to move outside of her area, which was digital marketing. She was doing well, but she wanted to get promoted, and there was no spot in that particular silo. But she did well while she was there. There was like a 34% increase in customer loyalty. How did she do that? Well, she not only did she have an MBA and she knew kind of business, where the business wanted to go and what the business was hoping to achieve with the marketing platform. And this is almost hard to explain, but she had a technical filter. You know, I'm not a technical person. I don't know if you are, or I'm sure there are people on this call who are, who immediately see challenges or issues, things going on in the workplace that could have a technical solution. That's what they can bring to it. I don't see it. I don't see the world that way. I have these big visions and, you know, I'm kind of up here. I don't see the technical, but this is what she could bring to the table. So it was that combination that helped her reach successful business objectives. So then we identified people in the other silos where she might want to move. And she set up meetings with them, and she would say, I just want to know, can you tell me what you do here? I'm really interested in some of the work that you do. And do you have any projects that maybe have imploded or you have challenges with? Because maybe I can help. maybe I can help you tweak the technology or bring a new technical solution to that particular issue. So she was taking her value proposition, connecting the dots as to how she could help them. And that's how you promote yourself without saying, I've been so successful here and I'm great at this, and consider me.
Well, it's interesting, Bonnie, because as I listen to you, it seems really obvious that she's focused on, in a way, helping other people win. So potentially a way of reframing it is being able to communicate in such a way that you're interested in the other person and what they want to achieve. And it's not that kind of blatant self-promotion, like, look at me, look at me.
It's a win-win. And really what you want to do is build mutually beneficial relationships across the organization. I mean, that's the kind of network that you want behind you. Those are the strongest ones when it's mutually beneficial. So can you see how different that is than an elevator pitch?
It's hugely different. So I'm curious, Bonnie, do you remember how that client that you're describing framed her value proposition?
Well, you don't necessarily memorize something the way you do an elevator pitch. It's an understanding that you have about how you can add value, how you do add value. And sometimes it's in the course of the conversation, just as I described it.
Sure. Well, and I'd like to invite those of you who are on the call today with us. I'm curious, and feel free to answer to all panelists or answer to everyone. Do you have a clear sense of your own value proposition? Just a yes or no is fine. Would love to hear from you about how you're doing with that tool called the Mirror, which helps you see your own value and how you bring that to your organization. Oh, all caps, yes, good. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. I see one no.
Yeah, so it's not easy to figure this out. So I highly recommend, you do the exercise in the book, that chapter, and you work with either your manager or a coach or a trusted colleague. Usually in my workshops, what I do is I partner people up and we do an exercise where they give each other feedback, and that really helps you to figure it out. But basically here's the challenge, is that what we do really well and how we approach the work, we think anybody can do, because it's so much a part of who we are. It's like we think it's innate, right? And it's like, oh, you don't look at the world like that? With a technical solution every 2 seconds? No, I don't. But I mean, it's we take it for granted. And so it's good to have somebody to bounce that off of, so somebody can say, well, yeah, how did you do that? And help you dig through some of the questions.
Sure. So I do see one comment here that someone is saying, Jennifer's saying she's clear on her value proposition but needs help to verbalize it. So I think sometimes that is a gap. There's the gap where we know what it is, but we don't know how to express it.
Yeah.
And that might be a case where consulting with a colleague or getting some input from someone else could help. So let's talk about the tool that addresses this reluctance to engage in office politics.
Okay. The next tool is a magnifying glass. And I use the magnifying glass to remind you to really take a good hard look at what's going on, but especially almost under the covers, being the detective with the magnifying glass. There are 3 things that you should look for with the magnifying glass. The first are what I call the rules and the unwritten rules. So the rules would be, policies and procedures, things you might find in the employee handbook. But the unwritten rules, when it comes to being politically savvy, you need to be aware of what the unwritten rules are. And you need to be aware of which ones are sacred and which ones you better not step on, because that's a landmine. And I often give this example, like you have a new job and you show up at 9 o'clock, and because it's a 40-hour work week, right? 9 to 5, right? Well, you show up at 9 o'clock and you see that everybody's been there since 7:30. Well, the unwritten rule is you get there 90 minutes before the manager comes in, you know. Now, if you don't comply, will you get fired? No, but it would help you to position yourself if you do comply. Yeah, so that's just a really simple example of an unwritten rule. And every department, every manager has different unwritten rules, so you need to use the magnifying glass. Pay attention. Next
So
thing.
how would you find those out, Bonnie? Sorry for interrupting. If you're brand new, how do you find that out?
Oh, if you're brand new, you have a huge advantage
Mm,
because, you know, you have like this grace period where you're observing and you are kind of basically an outsider for a while. And just looking around and even perhaps asking questions gives you an advantage. Whereas everybody else, you know, they may not even be paying attention to it. Next thing to look for is who has power and influence over your career. So it may not be obvious in the organization even. You may think, well, my manager has the power because he or she is the decision maker. But who's in their web of influence? Who do they turn to when they're looking to make decisions? And it's important to build relationships and build visibility and credibility with all those people. So even if your boss isn't advocating for you, there's somebody else at the table who can raise their hand and say, I think Becky would be perfect for that project. So who has power and influence? And the last one is basically the culture of the personality and understanding, again, using the magnifying glass to focus and pay attention to what kind of behavior is rewarded here and what isn't. And is it different for a woman than it might be for a man?
mm-hmm.
And how do I position myself given all of that? You know, very often looking for a female role model, somebody who has made it to leadership, is helpful because then you can see, well, how does she communicate? What's her body language like? How does she present herself in meetings? Who are her clients? Who's in her web of influence?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good way to kind of judge what might be acceptable, especially for a woman, to advance to leadership.
Sure, that's really helpful. So everyone needs their mirror and their magnifying glass. I think we have a few minutes to take some questions, and there are some that have been coming in. So if you have any questions about any of the topics we've talked about so far, or if you asked a question earlier that I haven't gotten to yet, please feel free to copy paste it back in so it's right at the beginning. But we did have a question back on the topic of microaggressions, Bonnie. So the question is, once you share your feelings, why stop with that? If the listener is not empathetic, they may not connect the dots and follow up with an action item. So I feel uncomfortable when you focus on my clothes. I recommend that you focus on my presentation. In short, what is the benefit of just sharing your feelings in the world of work is the question.
Okay. So as I talked about before, I'm giving a lot of benefit of doubt to the offender.
Mm.
And because I believe that, and all the interviews that I've done confirm that this belief that people aren't malicious, they're unaware.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that conversation helps them to recognize that it was offensive to you. Now, if it keeps repeating,
Mm-hmm.
if nothing happens, then you probably need to file a complaint, report that person to someone.
Sure. But so the direct answer is the reason why it's important to share your feelings in the world of work is to raise people's awareness.
Right.
Yes?
Right.
Right. If you don't share, then they may not be aware.
Depending on who that person is, as we talked before, how well you know them, how well you see them interacting with other people, and, you know, are they just really bullies and offensive to everyone?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you may not want to have that conversation. You may want to talk to your manager or someone in HR about it.
Sure. Let's see. So how do you deal with a culture that is mismanaged? So for example, 70% of managers have no experience at other companies and only know living in a world of chaos, and culture is affected because employees are not valued. And there's only one female director in a team of 11. Any suggestions for a person working in that environment?
Oh,
It's a really big question, isn't it, Bonnie?
on that I would say, give me a call for a complimentary session. I give 30-minute complimentary coaching sessions. That's a big one.
Probably not tackled in the next 7 minutes. How about one next step?
But one thing that and I'm serious, whoever that is, certainly email me. It's important, when you're looking for a job, to also interview that company. I mean, very often, especially women, we want to please, we want to be liked, we want to take the first job offer. We don't actually come into an interview assessing a future employer and whether or not we want to work there. Because the bottom line is, you're going to be hitting your head against the wall. And I'm not saying that particular situation, but something for everybody to consider is that you want to find an organization that is going to support your advancement in your career, if that's what you want, and whose values are aligned with yours. I've had clients who are go-getters and they really want to get stuff done and they're very enthusiastic, and then they find themselves in an organization. One client I can think of, the company was headquartered in Germany, and big global company, and everything was so slow, and it just didn't match. It wasn't like a good match. She said, got really frustrated, and then she left. So I think the overall message is, make sure you find an environment that's going to be supportive. And if you're in an environment that's not supportive, look for some guidance.
That's really helpful, Bonnie. I love that focus on, when you are in that position of choosing an employer, and we all get to choose at some point in our careers where we're going to work, make sure you have that values match. Make sure you can see advancement. You mentioned that when women come into an organization, they often can't see. You probably knew that in the interview.
Yeah.
And I know that not everyone has the luxury of waiting to take an offer, but that culture match is really important. So a follow-up question here is, what do you do when you've had to take the second step, escalating the situation due to repeated issues? I'm assuming potentially this is related to harassment, and higher management does nothing, or whatever they do doesn't make a difference.
It depends on how serious the charge was, but earlier I mentioned that survey where
70% of people.
They reported harassment, and 49% said nothing was done. So whether or not you have filed a complaint with HR, whether or not you should seek outside counsel, depends on the severity of the offense, really. Because you especially if it's repeated, you might want to seek legal counsel.
Thanks, Bonnie. So thanks to all of you who have tuned in today for your engagement and your questions, and for sharing your perspectives on these various topics about women advancing in the workplace. A couple of follow-up items for you today. One is certainly to check out Bonnie's latest edition of her book, The Politics of Promotion. You can find everything that Bonnie's doing at her new website, I'm going to get this wrong, BonnieMarcusLeadership.com. Sorry about that. I was going to say the old URL.
Yeah.
Also, I know it's brand new website at BonnieMarcusLeadership.com. Tons of insights and help. The other thing is, if you would like to send me an email today, I am Becky@weavinginfluence.com. We do have a PDF that we can send you about political savvy that Bonnie has put together. All we're asking is that you share some feedback and email to me. My email is becky@weavinginfluence.com. Kelly will put that in the chat. We will also put that in the follow-up email. We'll make sure our follow-up email today goes out from that address. You can simply respond to our follow-up email with some feedback, and we'll get that PDF out to you as a gift. And we also hope that you will find Bonnie's brand new, exciting podcast, Badass Women at Any Age. It's available on all the places where you download podcasts, and I'm a subscriber. I hope you'll become a subscriber too. Share it with your friends, and we would love to have you be a part of that growing community of Badass Women at Any Age. Bonnie, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thanks, Becky.
We also want to invite you to our next webinar. It's webinar number 3 in the series, right? 3. We're going to be talking about how to develop personal, authentic leadership. It's going to be exceedingly powerful. It is coming up in November, only about a month away. We'll be back with you for another conversation, and we hope you will sign up for that next event. So have a great Thursday. Bye, Bonnie.
Bye, everyone.